All right, let's go ahead and bring in our CBS Sports combat sports analyst. There he is, Campbell. And BC, man, a lot of smack talk coming into this one. Nate Diaz, you got Jake Paul. But Jake Paul finds a way. Had his first loss back in February to Fury. Gets the win here. But it was Nate Diaz who actually landed a higher percentage of the punches there. What are your thoughts here on this fight here between Nate Diaz and Jake Paul? Jake Paul gets the win. I thought Nate Diaz was the better entertainer, but Paul gets his hand raised.
I think you nailed it from that standpoint. Nate Diaz gets the loss here, but I don't think there were any losers. And I'm not always that nice when it comes to the idea of crossover, influencer boxing, or celebrity boxing. The comments leading up to this fight on Saturday night here were cringe. But I got to give everybody credit, particularly, obviously, Jake Paul and Nate Diaz. They both came to fight. Diaz put on a show. It was clear from the beginning that his strategy was to linger. He's the one that contractually pushed this fight from 8 rounds to the 10-round distance that they ended up meeting in. And Nate showed the veteran of the wars, that he could hang in there. In the end, though, Jake Paul gets the nod. And when we talk about improvements as a boxer, yes, this was a step forward for Jake Paul, losing the split decision last time out, even though he scored a knockdown in the final round. But the key part about it was Jake Paul kind of gassed out a little bit in the second half of that loss. You saw the physical change to his body come in, and he hired in a world-class boxing conditioning trainer, Larry Wade, brought in new trainers in his corner. And this was a more pinpoint, more accurate, sharper Jake Paul. Couple moments where it looked like he was getting tired, and that's where Diaz tried to step on the gas. But like I mentioned, not really a loser at the end of the day. An entertaining fight. Pretty much everyone went home happy.
Yeah, BC, very entertaining here. And Jake Paul said he predicted a 5th-round knockout of Nate Diaz. He didn't get the 5th-round knockout, got the knockdown there in the 5th round, so he does get the win. But once again, there's a lot of mixed messages, especially in social media. What did you think of his performance as far as, did he improve from that last fight to Fury back in February? And what are his prospects going forward here?
Yeah, well, I mean, the improvement I talked about was fitness related. But if you talk about his actual technique, I really like the puncher that Jake Paul is turning into. His commitment to the fundamentals has been key since the beginning. He seems to be a quick student. The one thing I always want to put the brakes on is the idea that he's going to cross over and truly become a legitimate championship boxer. That feels like a type of gap that would be too hard to cross for somebody that came to the sport late and is such a novice. But if you're wanting Jake Paul to improve fight by fight, this was the showcase of that. Offensively, when he worked off the jab, he was able to land clean shots. And in particular against the southpaw Diaz, a looping lead left hook was largely the punch that did most of the damage. Paul had Diaz close to going out at the end of the 1st round. And after a Nate Diaz comeback round in round 4, the big key for Paul was how he reacted to that. He came out there, and you see it right there, the knockdown in round 5. Paul putting together the defense with the fitness, with the footwork, with the head movement, not world class, but when it comes down to fighting former UFC stars, Jake Paul, younger, stronger, faster, better.
Yeah, 5-0 now against MMA fighters. Saw that hook there in the 5th round. Got Nate Diaz on the canvas. Was surprised to see Nate Diaz actually rise up like the Undertaker and get up there in the 5th round. Acquitted himself well here. So what's next here for Jake Paul? He did say that he offered Nate Diaz $10 million to fight MMA. We saw Diaz come into Jake Paul's realm. Now, will we get to see Jake Paul go into Nate Diaz's realm here? What's next for Jake Paul? Will he fight? And will Nate Diaz take this rematch here? Will it be in the ring or will it be in the cage, BC?
Well, it really comes down to dollars at the end of the day. So Nate Diaz was able to fight out the end of his UFC contract to make him eligible to take this boxing match. But you have to believe UFC has keen interest on a Nate Diaz comeback. Why? Because of that inevitable cash-in opportunity of a trilogy fight against Conor McGregor. They split their first 2 matchups in 2016. The $10 million offer from Jake Paul and PFL in general certainly has to be the kind that Nate Diaz and his team will take seriously. But you have to believe a phone call over to the UFC will be part of the short-term discussion here for Nate Diaz. Can they give him a multi-fight deal with superstar money attached that would make a rematch in the MMA realm with Jake just not, well, worth it in that regard? If they did the MMA fight, you'd have to believe it'd be an attraction fight, PFL, a big-time competitor, if you will, of the UFC, if we can say that about any secondary MMA organization. But they've signed Francis Ngannou, the former UFC heavyweight champion. They've got Jake Paul. It would be an attraction in the MMA cage that fans would need to see. But let's see what Dana White and the UFC have to say about that behind the scenes and on the phone.
Yeah, last time we saw Nate Diaz fight was September 2022, UFC 279. So we'll see about some sort of rematch. Will it be UFC or will it be in the boxing ring? But as Jake Paul improved to 7-1 in his pro boxing career, Nate Diaz falls to 0-1. He is BC, Brian Campbell, our CBS Sports combat sports analyst. BC, good job there. Enjoy your weekend. And for all things combat, check out the award-winning Morning Combat with Luke Thomas and our guy right there, BC, Brian Campbell. You can watch the series on YouTube. You can also listen to the podcast on Apple and Spotify. And be sure to scan the QR code now and vote for Morning Combat for Best MMA Programming at the World MMA Awards.